Yes, yes, yes. Welcome back, juniors at James Valley Christian School. It's me, your boy, Mr. Borchard. We're here looking at the agenda for day number 26. 26. Day 26. There we go. Oh man, I've lost my mind. All right. I'm looking at the agenda. It's a much shorter agenda than it was for the last class that we had. And that's because we're mainly just picking up right where we left off with part 2 of our Hebrews lecture. So if you don't mind, take this opportunity to pause this video and complete the Heidelberg Catechism Day 5 daily devotional, and then I'll be waiting for you here when you get back. Okay, if you're watching me from starting right now on, that means you have finished your devotional, and here we are. Pull up that PowerPoint from the previous day. There won't be that same PowerPoint in this new slot, in this new folder for this day. It doesn't make any sense to me to put the same PowerPoint up 2 times. Okay, so I'm picking up from slide number 4 in that PowerPoint on the slide that says Hebrews Part 2, and now I'm transitioning. I've already gone over to the very next PowerPoint slide titled The Author Explained Further. All right. Here is what we know about the author, and it can be summed up in a couple things. We know that he is a dynamic preacher who knows the Old Testament really well and was trained in a synagogue. Okay, we can tell by the command that he has of the Old Testament that this is an educated person and that he wrote well and that he spoke well. All right. Another thing that we can tell about the book, about the author, is highly educated. I think I said that in point number 1, but there are 2 separate points. Point number 1 was he was a dynamic preacher, knew the OT well, was trained. Another thing was that he was highly educated. All right. When we look at those 2 descriptions, we might ask ourselves, well, why not Paul? That really matches perfectly with what we know about Paul. He was highly educated under Gamaliel, as we learned when we studied Acts, and he also knew the Old Testament really well. He drew upon it regularly and clearly understood the themes. But here's at least 3 points for why this might not be Paul. Okay, I'm not trying to influence you on your Hebrews whodunit assignment. There are still a lot of good reasons why people have that say this book was written by Paul. But here are a few reasons why Paul is most likely not the author. Reason number 1, many of the rhetorical devices that the author uses in the book of Hebrews have not been seen in other Pauline literature, okay? And here's the thing, when you have a person who is developed as an author, as a writer, you generally see that person has their own style. And they might use the same type of rhetorical devices. And the guy who wrote the book of Hebrews uses rhetorical devices that are not found or not present in the books that we know for a fact were written by Paul. So that is kind of curiosity. Doesn't mean it definitely wasn't written by Paul. It just gives reason to investigate further who else might this author be. Another reason why this may not be Paul is kind of, again, along the same lines of having your style. This author introduces Old Testament quotes in a different way than Paul did, which not only is a difference in style, but could suggest a difference in education. Okay, this could be that a person was educated by someone other than Gamaliel. The way that boys were educated at that time was once they reached age 13, they essentially took a big standardized test, not so standardized, but a big test. And if you passed this test, if you were the few who passed it, you moved on to go to rabbi school, and you followed a rabbi around, and you copied that rabbi's practices down to the T. And so Paul had his style that he probably would have learned from his rabbi, and this guy, whoever wrote the book of Hebrews, has his style, which is different from Paul's, that he most likely would have learned from the rabbi who educated him. Another reason why this book may not be written by Paul is that the author depicts himself. He says, when he's describing himself, he says that he has received the gospel from theological witnesses who were commissioned by God. Okay, if you look at Hebrews chapter 2, verse 3, he says that he received the gospel from those who were commissioned and sent by God. And that is contrary to how we understand Paul's conversion experience from the book of Acts. Paul's had a miraculous experience. It was first person, where he was introduced to Jesus Christ himself. And so a whole different way of coming to faith. This person who wrote Hebrews must have been talking to someone who was a Christian, and so then they became saved, whereas Paul himself had a miraculous encounter. I would love it if some of you students would, in your Hebrews Whodunit assignment, would address that third point and say where the inconsistencies might be in that point, and how that could potentially still denote a Pauline authorship. Last point here for this slide, students, is it says here, there are other possible authors for the book of Hebrews. But here's the thing. This is where I'm at in life. What's the point? I know I'm having you guys do this assignment. I think talking about this stuff is actually really, really fun. But I get to a point where I personally ask myself, we've talked about this matter so much. It doesn't affect the way we believe, because we still believe that this book was inspired by God. So what actually is the point of nailing down Pauline authorship or Apollian authorship or not? And so there comes a point in these discussions where I put my foot down and I say, but what's the point, guys? What's the point? Let's transition to the next slide here, titled, Who Were the Recipients? We got to know who these people were, because that helps us to interpret this book. The first thing that we got to know about these recipients is the author appears to be talking to people who have background in the Jewish synagogue. He is taking certain knowledge for granted and expecting the readers to have a certain understanding of the way Jewish synagogues operated. And so we can understand that most likely these readers would have been people with experience in Jewish synagogues. We can't exactly denote that they were for sure Jewish. It gives a good indication that they probably were. But they may have been Gentiles who were around a Jewish synagogue. It could have also been a mixed group, Jewish Christians and also Gentile Christians. A second idea for these recipients is some associated this group of believers must have been those who abandoned the faith and returned to Judaism. Okay, going along with the themes of apostasy that we discussed in the previous lecture, these guys that were being written to must have had some association with those who were apostates. And again, that means that someone who was a Christian but abandoned the faith to pursue other practices. And in this instance, it would have been someone who returned to the Jewish faith after initially professing that Jesus Christ is Lord. So, third fact about the recipients. The church being dressed, and this is, we can take this or leave. This kind of goes back to my thing where I say, what's the point? Because we may not actually ever know. But the church being addressed is most likely in Rome. The group of believers being addressed were most likely in Rome. That does not exactly mean that this is the same group of people that Paul wrote to in the book of Romans. Although this could be used as a way for people to say this is like a follow-up book to that book, the book of Romans. Paul heard about these issues and wrote a follow-up book to these believers. But here's where we get this idea, though, of this church being addressed was likely in Rome. If we look at Hebrews chapter 13, verse 24, there's this phrase used, "Those in Italy send their greetings." To say those in Italy is a common expression for people who lived in the Italian region but were not actually in Rome. And so to say those in Italy, it would have specifically excluded Rome and very well could have been a direct address to Roman Christians. Let's transition here to slide number 7. I have an article for you to read on this part here. So go ahead and pause the video really quick, click on the link, read through the article, come back when you're done. Okay, if you're back now, I have some more reading for you to do. Pause this again and read through Hebrews chapter 6 through chapter 8. I'll wait. Okay, what an interesting read, right? Chapters 6 through 8. What does it say about salvation? These are the specific questions that I have here that I want you to answer on a piece of paper and submit, okay? You don't even have to answer on a piece of paper. You can submit it in the Dropbox, Word document Dropbox. You would know what I mean about Dropbox if you watch the video on assignment submission, okay? So what does it say of salvation? How does it describe salvation? And does the way that Hebrew describes salvation and losing salvation, does that contradict what we talked about before in Romans 9 through 10 and Ephesians 1 and 2? I want you to answer these questions because these two verses, these categories here are seen as conflicting with one another. And a lot of people use these to say, well, see, the Bible supports Calvinism. Well, see, the Bible supports Arminianism. And I want to see if you can come to the bottom of this yourself. We know that God's holy word is perfect. It is infallible. It does not contradict itself. And so with that, we need to find the harmony that can exist with these seemingly two different portrayals of salvation. All right, guys, the next slide here is just my works cited. We have officially come to the end of this lecture video. Give yourself a round of applause. Throw yourself a birthday party. So proud of you. By the way, if any of you had a birthday while this whole quarantine thing is going on, I'm so sorry. Happy birthday to you. Don't be too bummed, though. People do love you, and they would have shown up to your birthday party were we allowed to have parties, okay? Let me pray for you, and then I'll see you in the next video. Heavenly Father, please give blessings onto my students, the 11th grade students. Please give me the ability to effectively teach and to communicate your word and your truth to these students. I pray all these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. God bless you.